$3.4 billion. Let that number sink in for a moment. If you spent $10,000 every single day, it would take you nearly 1,000 years to burn through it all. Stack it in 100 bills and the pile would rise taller than the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world. It's enough to buy 11,500 homes in the United States. And one man made that in just 24 hours. Not by inventing the next iPhone, not by building a global empire, not by winning the lottery, but by breaking an entire nation. This man wasn't a general. He didn't command tanks or armies. He didn't drop bombs or lead soldiers into battle. His weapon was money. His battlefield was the financial markets. And his name is George Soros, the man forever remembered as the man who broke Britain. But to understand how Soros pulled off the single greatest financial ambush in modern history, you need to understand the man himself. Because his story doesn't start in a boardroom in London or on Wall Street. It begins in the ashes of World War II, Budapest, 1944. A teenage boy forced to make unthinkable choices in order to survive. Choices that would leave scars. Choices that would shape the ruthless mindset of a man who could one day take on the Bank of England and win. This isn't just a story of money. It's a story of power, survival, and controversy. A story that blurs the line between brilliance and destruction. And a story that proves a single person with enough capital and cold calculation can bend entire nations to their will. So buckle up, because this is the rise of George Soros, the man who used money as his ultimate weapon. George Soros wasn't born into wealth, power, or privilege. He was born George Schwartz in Budapest, Hungary, in 1930, the child of a Jewish family at a time when being Jewish in Europe was becoming a death sentence. By the time he was 14, the world around him had descended into horror. In March 1944, Nazi forces occupied Hungary. The regime immediately began its brutal campaign: deportations, confiscations, and executions. Hundreds of thousands of Hungarian Jews would be sent to Auschwitz. For the Schwartz family, survival meant one thing: become someone else. George's father, Tivadar, understood this. He was a lawyer, but more importantly, a man who believed in quick thinking and deception as tools of survival. He arranged for forged Christian identity papers. Overnight, the Schwartz family became something they weren't. Christians on paper, Jews in reality. It worked. They were able to stay out of the cattle cars headed for the death camps, but survival demanded even more. Young George was placed with a government official named Baumbach, who posed as his godfather. For safety, Soros would live under his wing. But Baumbach wasn't just any bureaucrat. He was a man tasked with the confiscation of Jewish property, and here's where the story turns chilling. In a 1998 60 Minutes interview, George Soros, then already one of the richest men in the world, openly admitted what he did as a teenager. Steve Croft asked him directly, "You went out in fact and helped in the confiscation of property from the Jews?" Soros's answer, calm, unflinching. "Yes, that's right, yes." "Was it difficult?" Croft pressed. Not at all, Soros replied. No guilt, no hesitation, no regret. To some, that interview was shocking. To others, it was a glimpse into the making of a ruthless mindset. A boy who, at just 14, had learned that emotions could be a weakness. Survival required calculation. Think about it, most teenagers at that age are worrying about friends, school, or games. Soros was watching neighbors lose their homes, their possessions, their futures, and admitting decades later that he felt nothing. That mindset, forged in the fires of war and survival, would stay with him for life. Cold calculation, zero guilt, survival above all else. By the time the war ended, Soros had endured the unthinkable. Hungary lay in ruins, the Jewish community had been devastated, but he survived, and survival would become his superpower. With his father's guidance, George fled the shadows of Budapest and set his sights on a new world, London. There, at the London School of Economics, he came under the influence of philosopher Karl Popper, who preached the importance of open societies and the fallibility of human knowledge. But Soros wasn't just absorbing philosophy, he was sharpening his weapon. The boy who had learned to hide his identity and watch without guilt was now learning how to read and exploit human behavior itself. London gave him education, but it also gave him hunger. A hunger to escape poverty, a hunger to prove himself, a hunger to dominate the system before the system could crush him again. From the ruins of Hungary, George Soros was now preparing for his next battlefield, the world of finance. By the late 1940s, George Soros had made it out of war-torn Hungary and into London. He was no longer George Schwartz, the boy hiding behind fake papers. He was George Soros, a young man with a razor-sharp mind and an unshakable will to win. At the London School of Economics, Soros studied under the legendary philosopher Karl Popper. Popper's ideas about open societies and the fragility of human knowledge left a mark on him. But Soros wasn't destined to become a philosopher. He wasn't chasing truth, he was chasing survival and wealth. London gave him his education, but not his fortune. That required a move across the Atlantic to the beating heart of global finance, Wall Street. Arriving in New York, Soros worked humble jobs at investment banks, analyzing European stocks and trading opportunities. But unlike most analysts, he didn't just look at numbers. Soros looked for weakness, for cracks in the system, for moments when emotion outweighed logic, when panic or overconfidence distorted reality. This became his core philosophy. Markets are not driven by cold economic fundamentals. They are driven by human beings, and human beings are irrational. Fear, greed, euphoria, despair. These, Soros believed, moved markets more than facts ever could. And if you understood that, you could exploit it. In 1969, Soros founded his first hedge fund, Double Eagle. With $12 million in capital, it wasn't massive, but it was deadly. Hedge funds had more flexibility than traditional funds. They could short sell, leverage, and take bold positions that others couldn't. Soros thrived in this world of high-risk, high-reward bets. Double Eagle became so successful that by 1970, Soros left to form a new fund, Soros Fund Management. Over the next 2 decades, it grew into one of the most aggressive and profitable hedge funds on Wall Street. Soros wasn't just another investor. He was becoming a predator in the markets, someone who studied not just numbers, but psychology. He was a man who understood that when the herd stampeded in one direction, you could make a fortune by betting the other way, and he wasn't afraid to play dirty. Soros once said, "Markets are constantly in a state of uncertainty and flux. Money is made by discounting the obvious and betting on the unexpected." Translation: if the world thought a currency was safe, Soros would test that assumption. If everyone was confident, he would bet on their confidence cracking. By the late 1980s, Soros was managing billions. His reputation grew with every bold play. Some saw him as a financial genius. Others saw him as reckless, even dangerous. But Soros was waiting for the perfect opportunity. The moment when he could unleash his full financial arsenal. The moment when he could prove not just that he was smarter than other traders, but that he was stronger than governments themselves. And that opportunity came in the early 1990s. A single day that would cement his place in history. A single strike so devastating that it shook Britain to its core, September 16, 1992. The day the world learned what George Soros was truly capable of. The day he became known as the man who broke the Bank of England. By 1992, George Soros wasn't just another hedge fund manager. He was managing billions of dollars and carried the reputation of a man who could smell blood in the water before anyone else. And this time, he had his eyes on a much bigger prey, the British pound. The United Kingdom had joined the European Exchange Rate Mechanism, ERM, a system designed to stabilize European currencies ahead of creating a single euro currency. The idea was simple. Member countries promised to keep their currencies trading within narrow bands against each other. Stability, predictability, a united Europe. But Soros didn't see stability. He saw weakness. Britain's economy was struggling. Inflation was running at nearly triple Germany's rate. Interest rates were already painfully high, crushing businesses and homeowners. And yet, the pound had been locked into the ERM at an artificially high value. In Soros's eyes, this was unsustainable. It was only a matter of time before reality shattered the illusion. And when that moment came, Soros planned to strike, the setup. All through 1992, Soros's quantum fund quietly built a position. He was borrowing pounds and selling them, what traders call shorting. If the pound collapsed, he could buy it back cheaper, repay his loans, and pocket the difference. Most traders wouldn't dare challenge the Bank of England. After all, governments had deep reserves and the power to defend their currency. But Soros believed the bank was fighting a losing battle. He later explained his philosophy like this: markets are constantly wrong. The way to make money is to recognize the error and bet on its correction. And in his view, the pound was the error. September 16, 1992, the attack begins. That morning, Soros unleashed his war chest. He ramped up his short position from $1.5 billion to a staggering $10 billion. His fund was borrowing pounds from anyone who would deal with him, then dumping them on the market in massive waves. Other hedge funds saw what was happening and piled in. Suddenly, there was a tidal wave of selling pressure. The pound was being attacked from all sides. The Bank of England scrambled to respond. They weren't about to let speculators tear apart the British currency. First, they raised interest rates from 10% to 12%, hoping to attract buyers back to the pound. When that failed, they tried again, jacking rates all the way up to 15% in a single day. Imagine being a homeowner in Britain already struggling with a mortgage and hearing that interest rates just tripled overnight. It was economic madness. At the same time, the Bank of England spent billions of pounds from its reserves buying its own currency to prop up its value. At one point, they were burning through 2 billion per hour. But no matter how much they fought, the selling pressure was overwhelming. The market was bigger than the government, and George Soros knew it, the collapse. By the evening, the truth was undeniable. The pound could not hold. Britain was forced to surrender and withdraw from the European exchange rate mechanism. The result was brutal. The pound fell 15% against the German mark. It dropped 25% against the US dollar. The UK Treasury lost an estimated 3.3 billion in its failed defense, and George Soros? He walked away with over 1 billion in profit in a single day. Adjusted for inflation, that's over 3.4 billion today. It was one of the most humiliating defeats in modern British history. The Bank of England, one of the oldest and most powerful financial institutions in the world, had been brought to its knees, not by war, not by politics, but by a single hedge fund manager and his ruthless bet. From that day forward, Soros would be forever known as the man who broke the Bank of England. The fallout. The consequences were devastating. Britain's credibility on the global stage took a massive hit. Politicians were embarrassed. The government's economic strategy was in tatters. Ordinary citizens suffered as the pound's collapse rippled through the economy, but Soros didn't flinch. For him, it was proof of his philosophy in action. Governments could be beaten, markets could be bent, and money could be the sharpest weapon of all. As one journalist later put it, in one day, George Soros accomplished what entire armies could not. He forced a G7 nation to its knees. For Soros, it wasn't personal, it was business. Cold, calculated, and brutally effective. And now the world knew exactly what kind of predator he was. But this was only the beginning. Because once you've proven you can take down Britain, what's stopping you from targeting entire regions of the world? The answer? Nothing. And just 5 years later, Soros would unleash his strategy again. This time, the victims weren't in Europe, they were in Asia. After Black Wednesday, George Soros wasn't just rich, he was infamous. He had proven that a single man, armed with billions and fearless calculation, could force even a G7 government to its knees. But Soros wasn't done. Because once you prove you can break Britain, the world starts to wonder, who's next? The Asian financial crisis. By the mid-1990s, Soros's quantum fund was managing tens of billions. And Soros had his eye on the booming economies of Southeast Asia. Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, South Korea. For years, these Asian tigers had been growing rapidly. Foreign investment poured in, currencies soared, and optimism reigned, but Soros saw cracks beneath the surface. Many of these countries had pegged their currencies to the US dollar. Their growth was fueled by foreign debt. And just like Britain's pound in 1992, Soros believed these currencies were overvalued and vulnerable. In 1997, he struck again. Soros began aggressively shorting the Thai baht. As his trades mounted, panic spread. Investors rushed to dump Thai assets, fearing the currency would collapse. The panic became a stampede. The result was catastrophic. The Thai baht collapsed. The panic spread to Malaysia, Indonesia, and South Korea. Stock markets crashed. Millions lost jobs. Entire economies spiraled into recession. To this day, leaders in Asia accuse Soros of triggering the crisis. Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad famously called him a moron and a financial terrorist. And Soros's response? Cold as ever. I am basically there to make money. I cannot and do not look at the social consequences of what I do. I am engaged in an immoral activity. No guilt, no apologies, just profit. The amoral philosophy. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. Soros truly believed that financial markets were amoral battlefields. The rules weren't about right or wrong. They were about winning or losing. That same mindset, forged in the chaos of Nazi-occupied Hungary, still drove him decades later. Survival above morality, calculation above emotion, profit above everything else. To Soros, if a government's currency collapsed, that was proof of its weakness, not his crime. The shift to power. But Soros wasn't content with just making billions. With his fortune secured, he began to wield influence in another arena, politics. Since 1979, Soros has donated more than 32 billion to his network of foundations, collectively known as the Open Society Foundations. Their stated mission is to promote democracy, human rights, and liberal values worldwide. Through these foundations, Soros has funded education programs, public health initiatives, civil rights movements, pro-democracy campaigns in authoritarian countries, but the money hasn't stopped there. His donations have flowed into politics, funding progressive causes, influencing elections, and shaping debates on immigration, drug policy, and free speech. To his supporters, Soros is a visionary philanthropist, using his fortune to make the world freer and more just. To his critics, he is a shadowy puppet master, bending governments to his will from behind the scenes. The controversies are endless. In 2002, a French court convicted him of insider trading, fining him $2.2 million. Across Europe, he has been accused of funding mass migration movements and undermining national sovereignty. In Hungary, his homeland, Prime Minister Viktor Orbán labeled him a national security threat and banned Soros-funded organizations altogether. In the United States, his donations to progressive candidates and movements have made him a favorite target of conspiracy theories. Even his allies admit his power is unsettling. One European diplomat once said, "He can move world financial markets simply by voicing an opinion. He can destabilize a government by buying and selling its currency." Think about that. One man, unelected and unaccountable, with the ability to crash economies, fund revolutions, and tilt elections, all with the stroke of a pen or the whisper of a trade. That is the true legacy of George Soros, but time spares no one. Today, at 94 years old, Soros has stepped back from day-to-day control of his empire, handing the reins to his son, Alex Soros. Yet his influence remains, a $25 billion fortune, a global network of organizations, and a reputation as perhaps the most controversial financial figure of the last century. Love him or hate him, George Soros has become something bigger than an investor. He is a symbol, a myth, a lightning rod for debate about power, morality, and the dark forces that shape our world. And as his empire passes to the next generation, one question remains: will the son continue the father's legacy? Or will the world finally be free of the man who proved that money itself could be the most devastating weapon of all? George Soros is not just a man, he's a paradox. To some, he's a hero, a philanthropist who has given away more money than almost anyone in history, fighting for democracy and human rights. To others, he's a villain, a ruthless speculator who brought down currencies, ruined economies, and pulled political strings in the shadows. But whichever side you fall on, one thing is undeniable: George Soros changed the game. From a boy in Nazi-occupied Hungary who learned to suppress guilt in order to survive, to a Wall Street predator who saw human emotions as exploitable weaknesses, to the man who broke Britain with a single trade, to a global power broker funding causes and controversies across the world. His life reads like a thriller, but it's all true, the lessons of Soros. So what can we take away from his story? Governments are not invincible. Soros proved that even the strongest nations can be outmaneuvered by individuals with enough capital and courage to strike. Emotions move markets more than facts. Fear and greed are stronger than spreadsheets. Soros understood this better than anyone and profited from it again and again. 3. Survival shapes philosophy. From his teenage years, Soros believed guilt was a luxury. That mindset, born in the horrors of war, stayed with him for life. Money is the ultimate weapon. Tanks and armies can topple governments, but so can a flood of selling pressure in the currency markets. Soros chose money as his battlefield, and he won. 5. The line between genius and villain is thin. Was Soros brilliant for exposing economic weaknesses or destructive for exploiting them? The truth depends on where you stand. The legacy today, at 94 years old, Soros has handed control of his empire to his son, Alex Soros. The Open Society Foundations remain one of the largest networks of NGOs in the world, with influence stretching across continents. His financial empire, still worth over $25 billion, ensures that the Soros name will remain powerful for decades to come. But there's irony here too. The country that gave birth to George Soros, Hungary, now sees him as its greatest threat. Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has banned his organizations, calling Soros a national security risk. Think about that. The boy who once relied on forged papers to survive is now considered dangerous enough for his homeland to shut its doors on him. The final word, whether you see him as a brilliant investor who exposed weaknesses in global finance, A ruthless predator who profited off the suffering of millions, a visionary philanthropist advancing human rights, or a shadowy puppet master undermining sovereignty. George Soros' story is proof of one undeniable truth: money is power. And in the modern world, power doesn't need armies. It only needs capital, timing, and the will to use it. George Soros had all three, and he wasn't afraid to use them. So what do you think? Is George Soros a genius who exposed the flaws in global systems, or a villain who exploited them for personal gain? Drop your thoughts in the comments, I'll be reading them. And if you found this story as jaw-dropping as I did, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss more deep dives into the world's most powerful and controversial figures. Because as we've just seen, sometimes the most dangerous weapon in history isn't a bomb or a bullet. It's a man with no guilt, perfect timing, and $1 billion in his pocket.